Welcome, my name is Jimena Geke, and today I'm going to talk about Chilean Jewish Holocaust survivor memoirs as transnational literature and transgenerational memory. This is based in my PhD doctoral research that is currently undergoing at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. When you think about Holocaust literature and Jewish literature, you hardly think about Chile. In fact, in literary research, you may ask if there is something like a Jewish literature in Chile, and if so, which main features does it have? How can you talk about Holocaust literature or the place of Holocaust in this kind of literature, in Jewish Chilean literature? And so the first step in my research was to answer this kind of question, to show up that there is a corpus of works produced in Chile by Jewish writers that have some specific elements that you may allow you to identify these works as Jewish literature, and to talk about the memory of the Shoah, of the Holocaust experience inside these works. And a second moment, which is undergoing currently, so I'm going to just suggest some of the trends that I have been finding while analyzing these works, is that I want to give some arguments why I think this literature is a transnational one, and how this literature show evidence of a transgenerational memory process. So, first of all, I want to highlight what in this slide you can read. That is the fact that at the beginning of the 20th century, the Jewish community in Chile was starting a process of coming up, of show themselves in the public sphere. And while they were doing that, only or less than 20 years later, a important number of Jewish people arrived to this country because of the Nazi harassment during the first years in Germany and Austria, and second, after the war, people that came mostly from Eastern Europe and that had the experience of being in camps or in hiding or losing all their families and communities in the war. So most of the Jewish community nowadays in Chile is composed by descendants of Holocaust survivors. There are some alive that are still sharing their experiences at a Hebrew school, for example, or inside the Jewish communities. But just like in other countries, nowadays, the presence of Holocaust memory is mostly connected to second and third generation. Now, I started collecting a lot of different works, different books and writings. And what I have found is that, in fact, there are books. There is an interesting production, at least of a bit more than 100 works produced by Jewish authors. And the first striking characteristic of these productions are that most of them are writings of the self. What I mean with that is that they are autobiographies, of course, the traditional format, testimonies mostly of survivors of the Shoah, but also there are some, you may call them collaborative biographies, because most of them were written by someone else or with someone else, but talk and they talk about the experience of an individual. But in this case, they are not the traditional biography in the sense that they had the collaboration of the person that they are talking about. And also, you have an interesting group of autofiction or family history fictionalized, and a few, of course, family history narratives, genealogical studies, that kind of stuff. So the core of this collection of works is based in autobiographies, testimonies, collaborative biographies, and autofiction and family history fictionalized. Now, the focus of these works is not related to main characters of the social sphere. What I mean with that is not that even there are a few related to entrepreneurs or politicians, most of these works talk about normal people, like men or women that just wanted to tell their own experience. And they were written having as a focus or being focused in the Jewish community as a subject and as a reader. They were not written to be launched to the market for like massive readers. Now, what I want to highlight also is the time that this book were produced. Most of them were launched in the 2000s, 75%. And then you have another important moment in the 90s, but a few, very few before the 90s. So this is a 90s, 2000s phenomenon. And this is very interesting because you may ask why this memory is important to write about or to print in this moment and not, for example, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. What has happened in the Jewish community and in the national context and the international context, which allowed the coming up of all this production at this moment and not before. Here you have a sample of manuscripts. And I classified these works according to if they were written by men or women and the kind of writing that we're talking about. In the first row, we have autobiographies, then testimonies, biographies, family history, and self-fiction, autofiction. And here I included a division between generations, first, second, and third generation. Most of the books produced were produced by first generation, of course. With first generation, I mean those that arrived to Chile for the first time. I'm not talking about necessarily the age of the person. What I mean, you can have people that were born in the 1915 and someone that was born in 1940, but they share here the identity of first generation because they were the first in coming to Chile. Okay. Now, the three main elements in these works are related to the narrative of the Shoah, migration to Chile, and family history. And these three topics are strongly intertwined. The other element that they share is that this is a work where you are always crossing over borders. You talk about cosmopolitic cultural framework that is very typical in Jewish culture, but also you are crossing borders because of migration, because of escaping from the Nazis and trying to build a new life. And then you have another moment where you acknowledge the existence of family networks that go beyond the borders inside Latin America and from Latin America to United States, Israel, or some European countries. There is also an interesting issue with the languages in these works, because authors usually are, since they come from other countries, and though they have been in Chile for a long time, you can find some issues in the way they write, or they write in another language and then translate, or they publish their works in 2 languages or in 3 languages. For example, there are works that were written in Yiddish, translated to Spanish, or in Yiddish or in Hebrew, translated to English, and later to Spanish. And this is very interesting because there are some translation issues also in these works that are interesting to face. And finally, it is very interesting, the dialogue memories. They were written in the 90s and in the 2000s, the moment, for example, where countries like Chile or Argentina are facing the memory and a testimonial literary emergence of literatures related to the human rights violations and the memories of the dictatorship. And in that context, there is a dialogue between these Jewish memories and the dictatorship memories. And there are some interesting pieces of work produced that show evidence of this dialogue. Here we have some works, for example, where you have authors that have faced, like writing, collecting letters that talk about the period of the Holocaust, and also writing their experience in another book. Here you have books written based on the family archive. So, for example, Mi abuela estuvo en Auschwitz, the first one, written by Marcos Albo, is based in the testimony recorded by Spielberg Foundation, Shoah Foundation, and then it is shown as a novel based in that recording. Here we have another set of books. And finally, what I want to highlight is that you have evidence also of a transgenerational memory that is being expressed in this book, because there is an interesting group of mostly 3rd generation, though there are some works produced by 2nd generation, where they take this family archive, as I have told before, and they turn it into fiction. And this exercise of fictionalizing family history is based in the need of solve some silences that were installed in the memory of their families, and so an urgent need of searching for their roots, of connecting their own experience in Chile nowadays with this long time experience of their families. And they write novels, what they call novels, and in the market, those that have reached the market are presented as novels, but they use the real names of the families, the real places of origin, their stories. But they talk about novels because they don't have all the tools to fill in all those holes or those silences or those moments of emptiness where they cannot know exactly what happened to some of their relatives, or where their grandparents were unable to speak at all. And so, and I want to end with this, they show an interesting awareness of their Jewish roots and a question and a need to reinforce their own identity, to project this Jewish identity in this country, in this Latin American country, where they are a minority, and where they have somehow come up with a stronger Jewish identity after this whole century of building up communities, building up families, and standing as a cultural entity in Chile. So time is over, but I thank you for listening, and I would appreciate your comments and suggestions for this ongoing research.